What if the Crusades succeeded? After the Seljuk Turks invaded and conquered Anatolia from the Byzantines, then Byzantine Emperor Alexios Komnenos requested to the Pope that he'd help him retake Anatolia from the Turks. The Pope, Urban II, decided to instead launch a crusade to not just retake Anatolia, but also the Holy Land in modern-day Israel, which was lost to the Arab caliphates almost half a millennia ago. After the laughable People's Crusade, the actual Crusaders managed to push back the Muslims and retake Jerusalem, but instead of giving it back to the Byzantines, they formed the so-called Crusader states: the Kingdom of Jerusalem, County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa, while the Byzantines only got coastal Anatolia. After the Second Crusade, Edessa would cease to exist, and after the third one, yes, the one with Saladin and Richard the Lionheart, Jerusalem fell. The Fourth Crusade is famous for not fighting the Muslims, but rather the dissolution and breakup of the Byzantine Empire in 1204, which wouldn't be re-established until 1269. The Fifth Crusade was launched in Egypt, but would be another L for the Crusaders. The Sixth Crusade, however, resulted in them retaking Jerusalem and then later even expanding it to its largest size since the Third Crusade during the Barons' Crusade. But 3 years later Jerusalem would fall and the Seventh Crusade wouldn't see any success in retaking it. The last two crusades were the Eighth Crusade in Tunisia and Lord Edward's Crusade, both ending inconclusive. Later the Crusader states would fall and the Muslims maintained control over the Middle East and North Africa for the next few centuries until the age of imperialism. Even though there were other crusades like in the Baltic or Iberia, none were as famous as the Middle Eastern ones, and there have always been calls for a new one, especially against the rising Ottoman Empire, but live by now only in the minds of internet historians. But what if that didn't happen? What if the Crusades succeeded? In this timeline, the Crusaders are just more successful. During the Second and Third Crusade, they expand their realm to Syria and the Byzantines drive out the Turks and reclaim Anatolia. Saladin al-Ayyubi would be largely forgotten in history and his dynasty wouldn't reign over Syria and Egypt, while his eagle wouldn't be a symbol used by many countries in the area. The Fourth Crusade wouldn't happen and the Byzantine Empire endures as a great power in Eastern Europe, instead of being fragmented into smaller states like the Latin Empire, Nicaea or Trebizond. With the Fifth Crusade, the Europeans even reconquer Egypt. The Kingdom of Jerusalem expands into the Sinai Peninsula, thus giving them access to the Gulf of Suez. The rest of Egypt would be turned into the Kingdom of Egypt. Copts would likely see a resurgency. Copts are a Christian group native to Egypt under Muslim rule. Their numbers declined and make by now only 10% of the population. But this decline was gradual and by the time of the Crusades just recently lost their majority status. This would be restored by the Crusaders. However, Crusaders would favor Catholic Copts over Orthodox Copts. During the next Crusades, the Maghreb would also be retaken by the Europeans and be turned into the Kingdom of Tunis. With that, all former Byzantine lands would have been retaken by the Europeans. Not only would the Muslim faith be pushed out of these states, but also the Arabic language and Arabs themselves. With a likely pacification of Iraq, only the Arabian Peninsula would remain Arab. This exclusion wouldn't be just directed at Arabs, but also Jews, who often were attacked by Christians during the Crusades. Egypt would likely be Coptic, while Maghreb would speak Berber, but also French, as France was the one to retake it. Aramothic would make a comeback in Edessa, Antioch, and Tripoli. Jerusalem, and to a lesser degree all the other ones, would speak Latin. The Mongol invasions would still happen, and they do conquer the Khwarezmian Empire just like in our own timeline, but I doubt that they would manage to expand into the Crusader states or the Byzantine Empire. Without a Muslim Egypt, who knows, maybe Mansa Musa wouldn't get fame on his pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina. Without Turkic control over Anatolia, the Ottoman Empire wouldn't rise to prominence. This would result in the Byzantine Empire to endure and stay strong for a longer time period. This may lead to the Renaissance not happening, as it was born through Greek scholars fleeing to Italy after the fall of Constantinople. Western Europe might be significantly behind Eastern Europe, might be more powerful and wealthier. One can argue that the Reformation may also not happen. This means the religious wars in Europe, including but not limited to the 30 Years' War, wouldn't happen. we would have a more united and centralized Holy Roman Empire. In this timeline, Henry VIII just couldn't divorce his wife, thus resulting in Edward VI and Elizabeth not being born. After Mary's death, England could fall to the Habsburg through her marriage to King Philip. The Habsburg could then expand their realm to Scotland and Ireland, and without Protestantism, the Dutch may not rebel. With that, both the Spanish and Austrian Habsburg would be more powerful, and without an Ottoman threat could clown on France. Without Ottoman control over Constantinople, Europe wouldn't try to find alternate ways to India. Portuguese control over the Indian Ocean, parts of Africa, and the slave trade wouldn't occur, thus resulting in a weaker Portugal than in our own timeline. But more impactful would be the fact that Columbus wouldn't set sail to the west, thus finding the Americas. The Americas wouldn't be colonized by the European powers, and states like the Aztec Empire or the Inca Empire endure in their homeland. This would hurt Spain the most, as they lack gold and silver from the New World, but I guess this simply balances things out. The Mediterranean Sea, especially the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, and thus the Byzantines, would be more influential. The Byzantines could either reconquer parts of the Balkans like Serbia or Bulgaria, or fail at this, thus resulting in these nations enduring. Another state that endures is Hungary, which would stay strong in Eastern Europe. Europe would likely not build colonies in Africa, as these are done to get their hands on slaves, who were supposed to work on plantations in the Americas. There would be, however, settlements and expansion in northern Africa to Christianize and to white it. They probably also expand along the Red Sea towards Nubia and Abyssinia. Without the Dutch and England, capitalism and the stock market might not exist, or at least later. The colonization of India and Indonesia might also not happen, or at least get altered. Louis XIV wouldn't be the Sun King, as his realm just keeps getting bits taken off by the Habsburg, and instead of French culture, it would be German culture that would be more prevalent during the Baroque period. Without a 30 Years' War, Sweden might not be as dominant, and without a Great Turkish War, Denmark, Norway, Poland, Lithuania, and Russia wouldn't be delayed, and would declare war earlier and quickly win. Denmark, Norway would take Scania, Halland, Blekinge, Bokelson, and Ven. Poland, Lithuania takes Livonia, and Russia takes Estonia and Ingria, and becomes an empire. Without Protestantism, Prussia might not exist, and Poland would hold on to it. This also means Austria rules all of the Holy Roman Empire unopposed and unchallenged. The Holy Roman Empire would further centralize under Ferdinand II into an unitary state like, for example, Spain or France. The Age of Enlightenment probably wouldn't happen without the Renaissance having happened, meaning the French Revolution might not happen, and thus the Napoleonic Wars wouldn't happen as well. Without Napoleon, the nationalistic and liberal sentiment wouldn't spread out to all of Europe. The absolute monarchies would continue to rule, and the nation-state wouldn't exist. The Holy Roman Empire would also not get dissolved, and continues to endure. The discovery of the Americas would happen around the 18th century, and if the continent were to get colonized, it would be done so primarily by the Habsburg, even without a treaty with the Pope. Under such an alternate delayed colonization of the Americas, the continent would still be colonized to this day. Around the same time, the African slave trade would begin with coastal African states. The Industrial Revolution, however, wouldn't happen, as for one, Europe is further back industrially, second, aristocrats tend to be against industrialization, and third, slavery would still be profitable. The discovery of the Moors would coincide with the decline of the Byzantines, and they could lose territories to other states like Bulgaria or Armenia, who would likely be supported in this by greater powers. This, however, wouldn't include Russia, as through their shared religion they are close friends, completely different to the rivalry with the Ottomans. After the fall of the Mughals, another Indian state, probably the Maratha, would reunify India and reign supreme until they too would eventually collapse, thus continuing the circle of life. With a less dominant Europe, and without the British, the century of humiliation wouldn't happen, and the Qing dynasty would continue to be a great power. Without capitalism and the Industrial Revolution, communism also wouldn't exist. The world would simply be feudal. The Crusader states of Edessa, Antioch, Tripoli, Jerusalem, Egypt, and Africa would develop their own cultures that also differentiate between themselves, and would be by now fully white and Christian, while Arabs only exist in the Arabian Peninsula. The Byzantine Empire also endures as an Eastern European powerhouse. If you liked the episode, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.